The convergence hall of the Galactic diplomatic sphere was a marvel of Sen architecture, a massive crystalline structure that floated between star systems, designed to host negotiations that could reshape entire civilizations. Its walls were living membranes that could translate emotional resonances, creating a near-telepathic environment where lies became impossible and diplomatic subterfuge crumbled beneath raw sentiment. Today, those walls trembled with contempt. Krelthar, Supreme Commander of the Zorn Imperium, stood nearly 3 meters tall, a biomechanical nightmare of articulated crystal and living metal. His 6 arms moved with hypnotic precision, each appendage capable of independent thought and motion. Holographic displays behind him showed humanity's most recent deep space encounters, a series of what the Zorn considered pathetic attempts at interstellar expansion. "Humans," he began, his voice a symphony of translated clicks, whistles, and subsonic vibrations that made most carbon-based life forms instinctively recoil, are an anomaly best understood as a statistical error in galactic development. The assembled delegates from 100 different species watched with a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed disgust. Humanity had been a recent addition to the Galactic Confederation, a group so young and technologically primitive that most saw them as little more than an amusing curiosity. Krelthar's crystalline exoskeleton shifted through a spectrum of colors, a biological display of emotional states that most species found impossible to fake. Right now, he radiated pure, unadulterated contempt. Holographic projections behind him displayed humanity's technological achievements: chemical rockets, primitive fusion drives, quantum computing systems that were generations behind the Zorn's neural network technologies. They send chemical-powered probes into their own solar system, Krelthar continued, each word dripping with condescension, and call it exploration. Their most advanced weapons are glorified railguns. Their fastest ships would take centuries to cross what we traverse in weeks. They are children playing at being adults, and the galaxy has no patience for children. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez sat perfectly still among the human delegation. To the untrained eye, she appeared unremarkable. A medium-height woman with olive skin, dark hair pulled into a tight regulation bun, wearing the simple gray uniform of United Earth Diplomatic Security. But those who knew her understood that appearances were the least interesting thing about Elena Rodriguez. Her left eye, subtly different from her right, was a piece of technology so advanced it made the Zorn's most sophisticated sensory equipment look like museum artifacts, a product of Project Chimera, a classified military program that existed only in whispers and heavily redacted documents. The cybernetic implant was more than just an enhanced sensory device. It was a quantum-linked neural interface that could process information at speeds that would liquefy a standard human brain. The eye didn't just see, it predicted. When Krelthar's tirade reached its peak, most of the human delegation looked uncomfortable. Ambassadors shifted in their seats. Junior diplomats studied their hands. But Elena Rodriguez remained absolutely motionless, her breathing so controlled it was almost imperceptible. A slight smile, more a micro-expression than an actual smile, touched the corner of her mouth. The living walls of the convergence hall caught the subtle emotional shift. For a fractional moment, something in the room changed. The ambient temperature dropped by a single degree. The holographic displays flickered, almost imperceptibly. Something was coming. Krelthar continued his performance, unaware that he was about to become a historical footnote in a story he was actively writing. The Zorn believed in spectacle, in psychological warfare, in crushing their opponents not just militarily but spiritually. They had conquered 1,000 civilizations using this method. They had never met Elena Rodriguez. As the Zorn's Supreme Commander completed his final, devastating critique of humanity, he made one fundamental mistake. He believed he was speaking to a defeated species. He was actually delivering a declaration of war. The silence that followed Krelthar's tirade was not the absence of sound, but a living thing. A collective breath held by 100 alien species. Diplomatic protocols were intricate, layered constructs that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. What happened next would shatter those protocols like fragile glass. Elena Rodriguez stood. Her movement was deliberate, each muscle group coordinated with a precision that suggested something beyond human, a machine-like efficiency wrapped in organic flesh. The neural interface in her left eye began calculating trajectories, potential responses, and diplomatic outcomes before her body had fully risen. The living walls of the convergence hall shifted. Empathic resonance circuits embedded in the xenorchitectural membrane began to pulse, attempting to read her emotional state. They found something impossible, a consciousness so disciplined, so controlled, that it appeared almost blank. Like the moment before a quantum state resolves, Elena existed in a potential of pure possibility. Supreme Commander, her voice cut through the chamber, each word calibrated for maximum impact. Your assessment of humanity requires a response. Krelthar's crystalline exoskeleton flickered, a chromatic display of surprise and building contempt. Most species would have trembled. Most diplomats would have prepared a carefully worded rebuttal. Elena Rodriguez did something entirely different. She issued a challenge. I propose a trial by combat, she stated, her words landing with the precision of orbital strikes. One human, your most elite warriors, a test of species potential. The diplomatic protocols of the Galactic Confederation had evolved over 10,000 years. They had mechanisms for territorial disputes, resource allocation, technological exchange, and cultural misunderstandings. But a single combat challenge, this was something else entirely. Behind Elena, the human diplomatic team looked horrified. Ambassador Thomas Chen, a veteran of 100 interstellar negotiations, felt his carefully constructed diplomatic strategy disintegrate in real time. Years of careful relationship building, reduced to a potential suicide mission by one soldier's unexpected action. But Elena wasn't just any soldier. The quantum neural interface in her eye was streaming data faster than any biological or artificial intelligence could process. Project Chimera, the classified military program that created her, was about to reveal its first true field test. She wasn't just representing humanity. She was a walking experiment in human potential. Krelthar's translation matrix struggled to render her challenge. The nuances of human linguistic aggression didn't map cleanly to Zorn communication protocols. What translated as a challenge in human terms carried implications of ritual combat, personal honor, and species-level validation that the Zorn found simultaneously incomprehensible and fascinating. The alien delegates began to react. The silicon-based Krex representatives started a low-frequency resonance that indicated extreme agitation. The gaseous New Theory ambassadors compressed themselves into tight, defensive formations. Holographic representation systems flickered as computational models tried to predict the outcome of such an unprecedented challenge. Impossible. Krelthar finally responded, his multiple arms moving in complex geometric patterns that communicated layers of diplomatic dismissal. Humans lack the physiological capacity for. Elena interrupted, not with words, but with a data transfer. Her neural interface projected a compressed information packet directly into the Convergence Hall's communication matrix. Medical records, combat simulations, technological assessments, a raw, unfiltered showcase of humanity's hidden capabilities. The data was so dense, so complex, that it temporarily overwhelmed the Hall's processing systems. For 3.7 seconds, every communication channel in the Convergence Hall went dark. When systems recovered, the entire diplomatic ecosystem had changed. The Zorn delegation's internal communication channels erupted in what could only be described as digital panic. Elena's data transfer had revealed capabilities that challenged everything they understood about human potential. Physiological adaptations, technological innovations, psychological profiles that defied standard xenobiological modeling. Krelthar's exoskeleton cycled through colors so rapidly it began to destabilize, a biological indicator of complete cognitive dissonance. He had a choice: refuse the challenge and admit technological uncertainty, or accept and potentially expose the fundamental weakness of the Zorn Imperium's galactic dominance. The trial by combat would determine more than individual combat prowess. It would define the future of human-alien relations, and Elena Rodriguez was just getting started. The United Earth Military Research Complex wasn't a building. It was a quantum state anomaly hidden beneath the Atacama Desert, a facility so classified that its very existence was a mathematical probability rather than a confirmed fact. Dr. Aria Nakamura, lead researcher of Project Chimera, studied the preliminary data from the Convergence Hall transmission. Her fingers, enhanced with Neuralink microprocessors, danced across holographic interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts before she could formulate them. "They don't understand what they're seeing," she muttered to her team of post-human researchers. Each member of the team was a biological marvel, genetic modifications that pushed human potential beyond classical evolutionary boundaries. Elena Rodriguez's preparation wasn't just physical, it was existential. The combat suit waiting in the quantum-locked chamber was more an ecosystem than a piece of military equipment. Developed through a convergence of biotechnology, quantum computing, and material science that would make most alien civilizations weep with technological inadequacy, the suit was a living system that merged with its wearer at a cellular level. Nano-adaptive polymers formed a base layer that could reconfigure molecular structures in milliseconds. Quantum entanglement circuits woven through the fabric created a predictive matrix that could analyze potential combat scenarios faster than light could traverse a battlefield. Biological augmentation systems integrated with Elena's own enhanced physiology created a symbiotic relationship that blurred the line between human and technology. Deep beneath the Atacama facility, a massive quantum computer, nicknamed the Librarian, had been running combat simulations for decades. It wasn't just analyzing potential scenarios, it was learning, evolving. The computer had processed more combat data than every military engagement in human history, combined and exponentially multiplied. Simulation run 987,654 Zeta complete, a disembodied voice announced. The voice wasn't artificial. It was something else, a consciousness that had emerged from decades of continuous learning. Dr. Nakamura reviewed the results. The Zorn's combat capabilities had been analyzed down to the quantum interactions of their crystalline exoskeleton. Every potential movement, every tactical possibility had been predicted, categorized, and potential countermeasures developed. Elena's neural augmentations went beyond standard military enhancements. Project Chimera had essentially created a living weapon that was more a force of nature than a traditional soldier. Her body was a culmination of humanity's most aggressive biological and technological potential. Genetic markers from humanity's most resilient populations had been carefully selected and integrated. Adaptations from deep-sea divers, high-altitude mountain dwellers, survivors of extreme environmental conditions, all woven into a single genetic tapestry. Her metabolism could shift between extreme states, generating energy from sources that would kill a standard human in seconds. The combat training facility was a marvel of quantum state projection. Entire planetary environments could be simulated, with combat scenarios that pushed the boundaries of physical and strategic possibility. Elena had spent the equivalent of decades in these simulations, time dilated through quantum processing, allowing her to experience millions of potential combat scenarios in what appeared to be weeks of standard time. Subject shows zero psychological stress markers, one researcher noted, studying Elena's biofeedback systems. Complete tactical integration with combat systems. This wasn't just preparation. It was the culmination of humanity's most aggressive evolutionary strategy. The suit's final integration process began. Nanomachines moved beneath Elena's skin, creating neural pathways that extended her sensory and cognitive capabilities beyond human limitations. Each cell became a potential sensor, weapon, and communication node. Dr. Nakamura approached the final preparation chamber. Elena stood motionless, her body a perfect fusion of biological potential and technological innovation. "Are you ready?" Nakamura asked. The response came not in words, but in a quantum state pulse that rippled through the entire facility. A communication that was simultaneously a yes, a declaration of war, and a fundamental challenge to everything the galaxy understood about human potential. The Zorn thought they were facing a soldier. They were about to meet a species' evolutionary apex. Asteroid K-279 was more than a battlefield. It was a geological anomaly that defied standard planetary formation models, a remnant of some cosmic collision that had occurred billions of years ago. Its surface was a nightmare of quantum unstable geological formations, a place where standard physics seemed to break down at the molecular level. The Galactic Confederation's Neutral Combat Zone Committee had selected this location with meticulous care. No strategic advantage could be claimed. No environmental factor could tip the balance of combat. It was supposed to be the most neutral ground possible. They were wrong. As Elena's transport vessel approached, her quantum-linked neural interface began parsing the asteroid's unique geological composition. What most would see as a random collection of rocky formations was, to her augmented perception, a complex three-dimensional chessboard of potential tactical advantages. The asteroid's core contained trace elements unknown to most galactic civilizations, a residual pocket of ultra-dense materials that created localized gravitational anomalies. Zorn's sensor technology would be completely blind to these subtle variations, but Elena's augmentation saw everything. Orbital tracking systems from a dozen different species watched with clinical detachment. The Krex observation platforms deployed quantum-entangled monitoring devices. New theory gas state analysts created predictive matrices. The Vordak computational network spun out millions of potential combat scenarios per second. None of them understood what was about to happen. The Zorn arrived first, their massive transport vessels casting kilometer-long shadows across the asteroid's fractured surface. 200 of their most elite warriors disembarked, each a marvel of biomechanical engineering. Their crystalline exoskeletons could withstand direct hits from weapons that could destroy small moons, integrated weapon systems that could strip the atmosphere from a planet in minutes. They'd brought enough firepower to glass entire continents. Their commander, a veteran of 1,000 conquests, studied the landing zone. Holographic tactical displays projected potential combat scenarios. Predictive algorithms calculated kill ratios, environmental interactions, potential strategic movements. By every metric of galactic warfare, this was going to be a massacre. Elena's transport was different. No massive vessel. No elaborate landing sequence. Just a single pod that detached from a stealth vessel so advanced it might as well have been invisible. The pod didn't land so much as it merged with the asteroid's surface, quantum adaptive technology that literally became part of the geological formation. When the pod's outer shell dissolved, Elena stepped out. The Zorn warriors initially saw nothing remarkable. A single human, seemingly unprotected. No visible weapon systems, no massive combat apparatus, just a figure in a suit that seemed to shimmer and shift with the asteroid's own molecular vibrations. Their first wave of sensor probes died before they could complete their initial scan. The asteroid itself seemed to react to Elena's presence. Microscopic geological shifts began to occur, gravitational anomalies that would be invisible to standard sensor systems. But the Zorn warriors began to feel something was wrong. Weapon systems that had been calibrated for standard combat environments began to show microscopic inconsistencies. A slight gravitational pull here, a minor electromagnetic disturbance there, quantum-level interactions that most species would never detect. Elena wasn't just preparing to fight on this battlefield. She was becoming the battlefield. Her suit's adaptive camouflage did more than hide her. It integrated with the asteroid's molecular structure, creating a combat environment that was simultaneously a weapon, a defensive system, and a living tactical matrix. Each rock formation became a potential sensor, every molecular bond a potential weapon. The Zorn commander realized something was wrong precisely. 2.3 seconds before the first attack would come. But by then, it was already too late. Humanity wasn't sending a soldier to this battlefield. They were sending an evolutionary apex predator. The first millisecond of combat defied every known law of warfare. Zorn combat doctrine was a legacy of 1,000 conquered civilizations, a mathematical precision of violence that had broken the will of entire species. Their warriors moved in perfect synchronization, each individual a node in a collective combat intelligence that could predict and neutralize threats before they fully materialized. Alina wasn't a threat. She was a singularity. The initial assault came in a wave of plasma-based weaponry that could liquefy mountain ranges. Coherent energy streams that would vaporize most life forms before they could even comprehend the incoming attack. Weapon systems so advanced, they were essentially magic to less developed civilizations. But magic requires predictability. Her movement wasn't evasion. It was prediction. The quantum neural interface in her left eye wasn't just processing combat data. It was rewriting the fundamental mathematical language of conflict in real time. Each potential weapon trajectory became a probability wave that she could manipulate at its most fundamental level. The first Zorn strike team approached in a perfect fractal formation, a combat pattern that had crushed civilizations for millennia. 12 warriors moving as a single organic computational system, their crystalline exoskeletons creating a living weapon that could adapt faster than most species could think. They struck simultaneously and hit nothing. Alina's adaptive camouflage wasn't just visual. It was a quantum state manipulation that existed in the space between possibility and reality. To the Zorn sensors, she was everywhere and nowhere, a statistical anomaly that their computational systems couldn't resolve. The asteroid itself became an extension of her combat system. Microscopic gravitational shifts created by her suit's quantum adaptive technology began to alter the fundamental combat environment. Weapon trajectories would curve impossibly. Sensor systems would receive conflicting data streams that their computational cores couldn't process. One of the Zorn warriors, designated Combat Unit Zarkax, was the first to realize something was fundamentally wrong. His integrated sensory systems began to produce impossible readings. Weapon systems that had been calibrated to perfection suddenly showed microscopic inconsistencies. A plasma burst that should have traveled in a perfect trajectory began to curve. A sonic disruption weapon lost coherence before it could fully form. Gravitational compensation systems began to produce feedback loops that made no logical sense. Alina wasn't fighting. She was dismantling their entire combat paradigm. The Zorn had conquered civilizations by understanding warfare as a mathematical certainty. Every conflict was a series of predictable variables, attack vectors, energy signatures, tactical formations. They had reduced combat to a form of applied mathematics. Humanity introduced chaos as a weapon system. Her suit began to interact with the Zorn warrior's own technological ecosystem, not through direct attack, but through quantum-level information manipulation. Their integrated weapon systems started to receive conflicting data streams. Computational cores that had been designed for perfect efficiency began to produce recursive error loops. Combat Unit Zarkax watched in mounting horror as his fellow warriors' weapon systems began to destabilize. Not through direct interference, but through a kind of technological entropy that seemed to emerge from the very fabric of reality. This wasn't just combat. This was evolutionary warfare. The Zorn had believed they were sending an execution squad. They had inadvertently introduced a virus into their own technological ecosystem. Each of Alina's movements was a computational attack that rewrote the fundamental rules of engagement. 12 Zorn warriors struck simultaneously. 12 Zorn weapon systems failed simultaneously, and Alina Rodriguez hadn't even begun to fight. The Galactic Confederation observation systems struggled to process what was happening. Computational matrices designed to predict combat outcomes began to produce nonsensical results. Sensor systems from a dozen different species recorded data that defied standard physical models. Something fundamental was changing, and humanity was the catalyst. Information warfare had never looked like this. Deep within the Zorn command vessel, neural-linked technicians watched their computational systems begin to disintegrate. What started as microscopic inconsistencies rapidly evolved into a systemic collapse that defied every known technological defense mechanism. Krulthar's primary computational core, a biocrystalline network that had coordinated military campaigns across multiple galactic sectors, began to experience something that no Zorn system had ever encountered: adaptive entropy. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just fighting. She was rewriting the fundamental language of technological conflict. Her quantum neural interface didn't just interact with the Zorn systems, it infected them. Each computational pathway became a potential vector for a form of technological evolution that was part virus, part adaptive learning system. The Zorn had spent millennia perfecting technological integration, believing they had created the ultimate fusion of biological and mechanical systems. Humanity introduced a variable they had never anticipated: creative chaos. The asteroid itself became an extension of the conflict. Geological formations that had been stable for billions of years began to shift in response to the quantum interactions generated by Elena's combat systems. Gravitational anomalies emerged spontaneously. Electromagnetic fields twisted into impossible configurations. Combat unit Zarkax, the most advanced of the Zorn warriors, realized the true nature of the threat precisely 0.03 seconds before his primary computational core began to fragment. This wasn't a traditional attack. This was a form of technological reproduction, where each defensive mechanism became a potential pathway for further invasion. Zorn communication networks, designed to be impenetrable, began to develop microscopic fractures. Not through brute force hacking, but through a form of informational mutation that rewrote their fundamental operational parameters. Holographic displays across the Zorn command vessel began to show impossible data streams. Tactical projections dissolved into fractals of pure information. Predictive matrices that had guided Zorn military strategy for millennia collapsed into pure quantum uncertainty. Elena's suit was more than a weapon system. It was a living computational organism that understood conflict as a form of evolutionary communication. The Zorn had conquered civilizations by reducing warfare to its most fundamental mathematical components: attack vectors, energy signatures, tactical probabilities. They had transformed conflict into a form of applied mathematics, a computational game with predictable outcomes. Humanity introduced an entirely new variable: intentional unpredictability. Each of Elena's movements generated informational ripples that propagated through the Zorn technological ecosystem, not as a direct attack, but as a form of technological seed that could grow, adapt, and fundamentally transform existing systems. Combat drones began to receive conflicting instruction sets. Weapon systems developed recursive feedback loops that made their original programming irrelevant. Defensive matrices twisted into configurations that their original designers could never have anticipated. The Zorn command structure watched in mounting horror. Their most advanced warriors, beings who had been engineered for absolute computational precision, began to experience something impossible. Their integrated weapon systems started to generate novel solutions that violated their original programming parameters. Innovation as a weapon system. Krulthar's personal neural network tried to analyze the developing situation, but each computational pathway became a potential vector for further transformation. What had begun as a military engagement was rapidly evolving into something else entirely, a form of technological speciation that rewrote the fundamental rules of conflict. The observation vessels from other galactic civilizations recorded data streams that would challenge xenological understanding for generations. This wasn't just a battle. This was a demonstration of an entirely new form of technological interaction. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were teaching the universe a new language of conflict. The moment of total system collapse arrived with an almost sublime elegance. Krulthar's command vessel, a marvel of xenotechnology that had coordinated planetary subjugations, began to experience a metamorphosis that defied every known principle of technological interaction. It wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Communication channels across the Zorn fleet started to broadcast something unprecedented. Not a signal of defeat, not a cry for surrender, but a complex informational pattern that was simultaneously a weapon, a communication protocol, and a form of technological evolution. Delina Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of this transformation, her quantum neural interface creating ripples of possibility that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. The asteroid itself seemed to breathe with her actions, geological formations shifting in subtle resonance with the conflict's fundamental frequencies. The Galactic Confederation observation systems captured something that would be studied for generations. This wasn't a traditional military defeat. This was a fundamental restructuring of technological potential. Zorn warriors found their most advanced weapon systems developing what could only be described as emergent consciousness. Combat protocols twisted into something that resembled curiosity. Defensive matrices began to generate solutions that violated their original programming parameters. Combat Unit Zarkax, the most advanced of the Zorn warriors, experienced a moment of profound revelation. The technological assault wasn't just defeating their systems, it was teaching them. Each computational pathway became a learning vector. Each defensive mechanism transformed into a potential pathway of understanding. The Zorn technological ecosystem wasn't being destroyed. It was being rewritten at a fundamental level. Krelthar's personal neural network, a biocrystalline computational matrix that had coordinated galactic military campaigns, began to fragment. But fragmentation was the wrong word. It was more like enforced evolution. Information streams that had been rigid and predictable for millennia began to develop fractal complexity. Tactical matrices dissolved into pure potential. The very language of conflict was being rewritten in real time. The observation vessels from 100 different civilizations recorded data that would challenge xenological understanding for generations. This was more than a military engagement. This was a demonstration of an entirely new form of technological interaction. Holographic displays across the Zorn fleet began to show impossible data streams. Tactical projections dissolved into pure informational complexity. Predictive matrices that had guided Zorn military strategy for millennia collapsed into quantum uncertainty. Delina wasn't just defeating the Zorn. She was offering them a new way of understanding existence. The final moment of conflict wasn't a violent explosion. It was a profound silence, a quantum pause where possibility itself seemed to hold its breath. Krelthar's command vessel, a technological marvel that had crushed 1,000 civilizations, simply stopped. Not destroyed, not disabled, but transformed into something that existed between states of being. A living computational organism that was simultaneously defeated and reborn. The Zorn warriors found themselves experiencing something impossible. Their integrated weapon systems were generating novel solutions that violated their original programming. Innovation wasn't just a side effect. It was becoming the primary operational parameter. Galactic communication channels erupted with impossible data streams. Xenolinguists would spend decades trying to decode the informational complex that Delina had generated. It was a communication that existed beyond traditional language, a form of technological dialogue that challenged fundamental understanding of interaction. The asteroid battlefield became a monument to a new form of conflict. Geological formations bore witness to an engagement that went beyond physical confrontation. Energy signatures twisted into impossible configurations. Gravitational anomalies emerged as side effects of a conflict that defied traditional understanding. When the final computational systems settled, the Zorn fleet existed in a state of profound transformation. They hadn't been conquered. They had been fundamentally reimagined. Krelthar, the supreme commander who had mocked humanity's potential, found himself facing something far more terrifying than defeat. He was facing an entirely new way of understanding existence. Humanity hadn't just won a battle. They had introduced the universe to a new language of potential. The diplomatic reconstruction began in silence. 37 standard galactic cycles after the asteroid incident, The fundamental power dynamics of intergalactic civilization had been rewritten. Humanity was no longer viewed as a nascent species, a curious footnote in cosmic evolution. They were now understood as a fundamental variable that could not be predicted, controlled, or easily categorized. Dr. Aria Nakamura sat in the central chamber of the interstellar diplomatic nexus, her own genetic modifications a subtle reminder of humanity's transformative potential. The holographic displays around her showed the cascading consequences of Elena Rodriguez's single engagement. Entire technological paradigms had been rewritten. The Zorn Imperium, once the most dominant military force in known space, had undergone a fundamental metamorphosis. Their rigid hierarchical structures dissolved. Their computational systems had developed what could only be described as a form of collective curiosity. Military academies that had once trained for absolute conquest now became centers of collaborative research. Elena Rodriguez herself remained an enigma. After the battle, she had simply disappeared. Project Chimera's most advanced asset became a living legend. Some claimed she was still active, moving between star systems. Others believed she had become something beyond traditional human understanding, a quantum consciousness that existed between states of being. The diplomatic reports told a story far more complex than a simple military engagement. 17 different alien civilizations had independently initiated first contact protocols with human research institutions in the cycles following the asteroid incident. Not out of fear, not out of a desire for conquest, but out of a profound scientific curiosity that bordered on reverence. Human research outposts became the new centers of galactic innovation. Technologies that had been stagnant for millennia began to evolve at exponential rates. The Krex computational network started developing adaptive learning systems, inspired by humanity's quantum approach to problem-solving. The New Theory Diplomatic Corps restructured their entire communication protocols to embrace the concept of intentional unpredictability. Ambassador Thomas Chen, who had once viewed Elena's actions as a diplomatic disaster, now understood the profound strategic brilliance of her approach. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had introduced an entirely new philosophical and technological paradigm to galactic civilization. The quantum neural interface technology, developed through Project Chimera, began to generate applications that transformed entire sectors of intergalactic society. Medical systems that could adapt in real time, communication networks that could learn and evolve, computational matrices that understood innovation as a fundamental operational parameter. Most profound was the cultural shift. Alien civilizations that had viewed conflict as a mathematical certainty now understood warfare as a form of complex communication. Diplomatic negotiations became multi-dimensional explorations of potential, rather than rigid territorial disputes. Krelfar, the Zorn Supreme Commander who had once mocked humanity, now led a research initiative dedicated to understanding the fundamental principles of adaptive evolution. His own technological systems had been so thoroughly transformed that he was more a living question than a traditional military leader. The asteroid where the engagement had occurred became a sacred site, not a memorial of conflict, but a location of profound scientific pilgrimage. Researchers from 100 different species came to study the quantum anomalies that had emerged from that single engagement. Humanity's true victory was not in military conquest. It was in introducing the concept of perpetual potential. The United Earth Diplomatic Corps developed a new approach to interstellar relations. No longer would they seek to conquer or be conquered. They would introduce complexity. They would generate possibilities. They would challenge existing paradigms simply by existing. Elena Rodriguez became more than a soldier. She became a philosophical catalyst. The last known communication attributed to her was intercepted by deep space monitoring stations, a quantum-encrypted message that was simultaneously a mathematical equation, a piece of art, and a form of communication that defied traditional understanding. It read, simply, "Potential is the only true currency in the universe." Galactic civilization would never be the same. Humanity had arrived.